today we are here at Universal Title, Old Town Alexandria office, and we are going to talk about everything about title. And the managing attorney, Kelly Satterwhite, is here right next to me. They have been serving my clients for years, and they have been taking great care of them. So let's dive into it, Kelly.
Sure.
What is a title company's role in a real estate transaction?
Sure. So the Universal Title or the title company or the settlement agent acts as kind of the central hub to the transaction. We don't represent buyers or sellers. We represent the contract. And by that, what I mean is we make sure everything that's supposed to get done gets done. We also act as the central kind of communicator between all the parties. We work with the buyers, sellers, agents, lender, and anyone else that we need to work with, HOA, payoff company, mortgage companies, things like that, to make sure that we get all the information that we need to compile all the numbers. We work with the buyer's lender to make sure that we have all of our numbers matching and correct. We generate some of the settlement documents ourselves, and then we also get a lender package from the lender if there's a loan. We'll get those documents from the lender. We'll print all that out. We'll set up a time for the parties to come in and sign. We call it a settlement conference. And then once everybody's signed all the documents, we have all the money. We will record the necessary documents at the courthouse, and then we'll send the money out wherever it's supposed to go. It's called disbursement.
Well, that's a great start. I mean, you pretty much summarized the whole process, right? Even though it looks so simple as you summarized it, there might be some bumps down the road, right? Once you get under contract. So in order to avoid those bumps, right, you do some certain things, which is, for instance, title search.
Yeah, sure.
Right? What are some of the things that you see as popping up as issues when you do a title search?
Sure. I mean, occasionally we have major title issues, which would be a third party somewhere in the chain of title whose interest wasn't accounted for, maybe a long lost heir, something like that, whose interest didn't get accounted for when the property changed hands. But more commonly what we see are what we call unreleased deeds of trust. That's a mortgage either from our seller or from a previous owner. The mortgage is recorded in the land records as a lien against the property. And once we pay that off as part of settlement, the bank is supposed to go in the land records and record a release. Unfortunately, they don't always do that. And so a lot of times when our sellers come in to sell their property, they have their mortgage, but they also have a prior owner's mortgage that's unreleased. That's a very common issue. We can certainly deal with it. Sometimes it takes some time. We'll talk about title insurance in a minute, but having title insurance could definitely speed up that process. Beyond that, current or prior owners in the chain of title who have a common name, because we search for judgment liens that could be recorded against the property. If anybody in the chain of title has a very common name, we're going to have to rule out, there's going to be 1 million judgments against John Smith. We're going to have to rule out all of those judgments somehow during the process. So those are our most common things.
Most common things. Okay. So speaking of title search and title insurance, title insurance, what is it exactly, and what is it necessary? Other than the things that you just mentioned, what would you say? Why would a buyer need to buy title insurance?
Sure. So title insurance protects the policyholder's interest in a piece of real property against third parties who might have an interest in that property. I usually give a little story to give the kind of an example of what we're talking about, and then we'll talk about the real world things. Sure. So let's say we have an elderly woman. She's got 2 grown children, a boy and a girl. Girl's taking care of mama. They haven't seen the boy in 20 years. Unfortunately, mama passes, and the property passes 50-50 to the 2 children. The daughter's handling mother's estate. She waits another 5 years. She hasn't seen her brother in 25 years at this point. She goes ahead and sells the property to you, right? Turns out, however, brother is alive, and he comes out, maybe 5-10 years later and says, "Oh, my mother died, but I was supposed to get half that property." He can rightfully go to you, Arthur, as the owner of the property and say, "Hey, my interest was never accounted for. Pay me or get out." Now, why would he go to you as opposed to the sister? The sister took the money because the sister could have spent the money at this point. It's often difficult to recover. Most people have title insurance and the property can't go anywhere. So it's easier for people to just make a claim against the property and try to recover. So title insurance would protect the property owner's interest against that type of third-party interest.
Right. So that was my follow-up question. What does it cover? And also, how long does the coverage last and up to what price point?
Okay, let's take them one at a time. What does it cover? So essentially, your title insurance is going to protect you against anything that has happened anytime prior to the time that you take title of the property. Okay. Now, one of our roles as the settlement agent, and we are also issuing the title insurance, is we do a title search on the property. So we pull all the records going back 60 years or to the original developer. We also search for any kind of judgment liens, any kind of unreleased mortgages, things like that we've talked about. That gets compiled into a report, and then I or one of our other attorneys will do what we call a title examination, where we actually go back through that report and connect all the dots and make sure there are no apparent issues like we just talked about with our son who they hadn't seen in 25 years. So really what people are buying title insurance against is people lie, people commit fraud, people don't record things that they're supposed to, and most importantly, we can't search everywhere, we can't know everything. We do our absolute best to mitigate the risk, but title claims are real. They do happen.
Right. And what's the coverage up to what price?
The coverage, so it depends on the policy that you get. There are two types of policies. I don't want to get too far into the weeds. The American Land Title Association, together with the Bureau of Insurance in the state where the property is located, regulate what that covers and what it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So they're pretty much standard policies no matter where you go. But most people get what we call the Alta Enhanced policy. That policy will cover you up to the full purchase price it's a one-time thing you pay at settlement. But also the Alta Enhanced policy will increase in value 5% a year for the first 5 years. After settlement to kind of help you keep track of inflation, right? Because over time the property is going to be worth more and more, and so that coverage will be a little bit less and less effective, but at least tries to cover you for those first few years
right.
of inflation.
So you mentioned different types of policies. What are the common to different types of policies?
So that's a really good question, and we get this question all the time leading up to settlement or at the table. So there are two types of policies. There's a lender's title insurance policy and an owner's title insurance policy. And if you remember earlier, what I said was the title insurance policy protects the policyholder's interest in a piece of real property. So the lender's policy protects the lender in the event that they have to foreclose on the property. They want to make the buyer buy them an insurance policy so that they know they have good, fully insured title to that property if they ever had to foreclose on it. The owner's policy will protect the owner's interest, right? That's your personal decision of whether you want to insure the property. The lender's title insurance policy, if you have a loan, that's not optional. Owner's title insurance is optional, but almost everybody buys it, and for good reason, because it's definitely something everybody should consider.
Sure. So tell me a little bit about the process. What if a claim arises right after closing? What does the process look like?
Right. So can I tell you a story?
Sure.
Okay. So in the fall, we had a guy. We got a contract in. We were handling. Guy was the sole heir of his uncle's property, and the property's here in Virginia. And the sole heir had filed all the appropriate documents with the courthouse saying that he was the heir. He opened an estate. He was the personal representative. Mm-hmm. He got under contract, and we had the property. We got all of those documents from the court. Everything looked totally legit. About a month after settlement, I got a call from an attorney who represented the other heirs. So I guess what happened was this guy knew that there were other heirs, but he just lied to the court and committed fraud and said he was the only heir so that he could take title of the property. But now those other heirs found out, and they hired an attorney, and he called me, and I said, oh my goodness, let's figure out what happens. So what happens in that situation is we're going to get in touch. First of all, you get in touch with me if you close with us, because I'm definitely going to be an advocate for you. But ultimately, we're going to give a call to the insurance company, the title insurer. We work with First American. It's the largest national title insurer, so they're not going to go out of business anytime soon or anything. We will give them a call. We'll talk to their claims people, and they'll do an investigation. And it's like any other insurance. They basically take it over from that point forward, and they'll either defend the owner in court, or in certain circumstances, they might just pay you off and buy you a new house, essentially.
Wow. Okay. So let's switch gears with
Sure.
surveys.
Okay.
Right, we talked enough about title insurance. What's the purpose of a survey? Let's start with one-on-one.
What is a survey? Maybe. So a survey is going to be an actual drawing of the property, showing the property boundaries and any improvements that have been built on the property. Improvement, that's a fancy word for house, deck, shed, any concrete that's been put on the property. That survey, the surveyor is going to go out and they're going to actually physically survey the land and create a drawing showing the exact boundaries, everything that's built on the property. The reason why we want to get a survey is because ultimately the buyer's title insurance is not going to cover anything that would have shown up on the survey had they gotten one. So what we're looking for when we get a survey most commonly are things like neighbor's fence is built on your property, your fence is built on the neighbor's property. And you want to get that survey because that's the buyer's opportunity to address those issues with the seller, right? You can at least either know, hey, the fence is over the line a foot, and maybe you're okay with that. You know, probably never going to be a big deal, but at least you know about it. But more importantly, if it's something major, and I have stories for that, it's the buyer can address that with the seller and say, hey, you got to move this fence. This is going to be $10,000, and I don't want the responsibility for that.
That's crazy. Do you recommend them for all properties?
I recommend them for almost all properties. Okay. Obviously not a condominium. There's no, unless there's some kind of ground associated with it. You don't want that. But even for, so first of all, I don't do surveys. I don't sell surveys. Sure. Right. But I think everybody should get one. Even if you have something like a townhouse where you have a small backyard. We had somebody come in and sell a townhouse, and there's, like a row of townhouses, and in the back there's a fence going along. And the back behind there's common property that's owned by the HOA. Well, it turns out the fence that was built behind all the houses was built over onto the HOA property when they were constructed. And then somebody new got in at the HOA and said, hey, you guys got to move this fence, right? I'm sure he was very unpopular, because who wants to hear that? But the point is, even with a small backyard like that, we want to make sure that at least you know about those issues that might come up in the future.
Sure, absolutely. So you talked about the title processing, title insurance surveys. Let's switch gears and talk about closing, right?
Sure.
That's the most important part for buyers and sellers, right? What types of fees should buyers and sellers need to expect at closing?
So just in terms of general amount, a good estimate for buyers is going to be 3% of the sale price in closing costs. Mm-hmm. Closing costs for a buyer are going to consist of lender fees, transfer taxes, maybe we can talk about this more if we need to, but prepaid property taxes and homeowners insurance. You're going to have to pay homeowners insurance for a full year. Our title fees, title insurance, all of those things, usually a good rule of thumb is to add up to about 3%.
3% for buyers.
And then for sellers, it's usually about 1% of the purchase price on top of any commissions that they've agreed to as part of the listing agreement. And for the sellers, the main expenses are going to be transfer taxes, tax prorations, and they pay a small fee. They pay to prepare the deed that transfers title.
And what measures are taken to protect buyers and sellers from paying unnecessary fees?
Right. That definitely is something that historically has been an issue. We are very transparent. I can only necessarily speak for Universal Title. We're very transparent about our fees. You can get a quote from us anytime that you want, but also as soon as we open up the file, we're going to send out a sheet to the buyers and sellers and disclose exactly what our fees are and exactly what that money is going to be used for. But more importantly, if at any point the buyer or seller has a question about fees, they can always contact me directly or one of our processors. We'd be happy to explain it. But obviously I have a bias, but we don't charge junk fees. Like everything we charge is for a legitimate service, and I'm happy to explain that.
And the last question is, in this day and age, right, with technology and everything that's been going on, there's a lot of fraud and scams going on as well. What type of programs or what type of measures is Universal Title taking against these scammers?
So, really good question. So let's talk about one of the things we deal with the most is wire fraud. So typically when you're sending a large amount of money for settlement, or if we're going to wire the proceeds to the seller, that's going to be a large amount of money. We're usually going to do that by wire transfer, and that's an electronic transfer between banks. But unlike an e-check or what we call electronic funds transfer, a wire transfer is permanent. So if for some reason the wire instructions, somebody gets in between us and the seller or changes the wire instructions to a fraudulent bank account, a lot of the times it's gone. Once we send the money, it's gone. Now, I've had that happen a couple times and we did get the money back. But it's more or less like just throwing cash out the window. So we take a lot of steps to ensure that we don't have any issues with wire fraud. You will anybody who works with us will only ever get our wire instructions through our secure encrypted platform Qualia that we use. So we'll never email those things to you. So you would actually have to go and log in and then you can download them. You know you're getting those instructions from us. But then on the seller side and on in terms of payoffs for mortgages, those are other big things that we're going to wire money for. We make the sellers fill out a form in their handwriting with their information. And if they have to make a change to the wire form, we have them come back in and change the instructions in front of a universal title employee. And for some people, if that happens, if there's like one number off, we're going to call and verify. That's fine. But we're talking about major changes to the wire instructions. We make the sellers come back in, and that can seem like a pain to some people. But our biggest concern is that the true owner of the property gets their money. Right, and unfortunately, this happens so often that we have to take those extreme precautions.
Absolutely.
So, in terms of keeping everything secure, one of the things I mentioned a minute ago was Qualia. It's our secure online cloud platform. So, anytime we open a contract, you'll get an invitation by email to go on and create an account. It takes just a couple seconds. And then every time you log into there and enter your information, we have a series of questions we'll ask you. All of that is secure and encrypted, and only we and you can access that.
That's
no
awesome.
third parties can. The other thing we do, we've really seen a lot of title fraud, title theft in the last year. For sellers, we know what the profile for these things are. It's usually non-owner occupied and or vacant land probably with no payoffs. So if your property that's being sold fits one of those or all of those criteria, we have the sellers send us clear pictures of their ID front and back, two different forms of ID. We have software we can run those through, and it tells us if it's a legitimate ID or not. And then the last thing we'll do is have the sellers do what we call a knowledge-based assessment, which you've experienced this before, probably logging into your bank. They ask you questions only you could know based off your credit report, like what was the color of your 1986 Oldsmobile? You know what I mean? They'll ask you, and so we verify that the seller is who they say they are. That way, just takes a second, but it eliminates any potential for fraud.
Perfect. That's awesome, man. And this is it. Thank you for answering all these questions. If you have any questions, contact us. We are always here to help. See you in the next one.